Okay. I saw Morbius yesterday. It had issues, but I'd like to discuss what they were and how I think they could be fixed. I'm gonna go full spoilers, you've been warned. The thing about the movie that I found interesting from a historical perspective was that it felt like one of those early 2000s, maybe even late 90s superhero movies where there's a promise of a larger picture, but the movie itself has a very narrow sort of scope, which we haven't really seen a lot of those for quite a long time, ever since the MCU became a thing. But I think the thing that really undid the movie were problems with the pacing and just kind of failures in logic. A couple of the biggest problems were how Milo became a vampire, Bancroft coming back to life at the end, presumably as a vampire, and just problems with the overall pacing. Like, the amount of questions I have in my mind about how this plot was supposed to work there are a lot. When Morbius is injected with the serum, he doesn't do it alone. He doesn't just stick it in his arm or something, and I thought that was... they made it really gnarly, and I appreciated that. He has to bend forward, and then Bancroft has to feel along his spine, and she has this huge needle with the serum and has to inject it right into his spinal column, apparently. And it was incredibly painful, and so later in the movie, when Matt Smith's character Milo comes to see Michael, there's a lot of M's in this movie, Matt, Michael, Milo. Milo wants the serum to cure his disease. Presumably he took one of the two vials that were sitting on the table and injected himself. But my question is, how was he able to do that? Did he just stick it in his arm somehow? And it didn't need to be injected in the spine? Did he have an accomplice that the movie didn't identify? And I mean, this is the origin of the main villain, so it feels like that base really should have been covered, and it just was not. But on this note, I felt that the big problem with this movie, it feels as though it was 2 or 3 different ideas that didn't quite crystallize. Maybe it just spent too long in development hell, and that led to it being over-edited, because it felt too short. It felt like we needed a few scenes to kind of flesh out ideas. Like, at the end, Bancroft comes back to life after Morbius bites her in the neck, and there's no foreshadowing that this problem that Morbius has can create other vampires just through bites, so it just kind of is a snap reveal at the end, and it feels like a bit of a pull out of nowhere, if you catch my meaning. There was a line late in the movie where, there was a line in that same scene where Milo presumably took the serum and injected himself later, where he says that he's never denied Michael anything, and I didn't feel like there was any foundation for that line. Like, we weren't shown why he would say that. Did Milo pay for a lot of the research that Michael has been doing? It felt like there was some kind of context missing for that, in my opinion. Maybe it went right past me when I was watching the movie, but I usually notice these things. And a lot of these problems could have been fixed with one scene or one throwaway line. If earlier in the movie, during the montage-ish stuff at the beginning, establishing the who's and whys of everything, if there was a scene, or just a throwaway line saying that Milo has invested a lot of money in Morbius's research, that would fill in that blank really nicely. So extra scenes felt needed to offer context or just fill in big gaps of the plot. And I almost feel that there's like a 4-hour version of this movie, and it was heavily cut. Apparently there were reshoots going on in 2021 during all the delays that this movie had, because this movie had a very troubled release schedule because reasons. I had sort of a theory in the back of my mind while watching the movie that maybe Milo had an accomplice, And my speculation was that it might have been Jared Harris's character, Dr. Nichols, I believe his name is. And I thought, like, maybe there's some kind of maybe they're brewing some kind of conflict there between the father figure and his surrogate sons, but there was never any expansion on exactly how Milo took the serum, so that just didn't go anywhere. But I almost feel that it was implied and perhaps is on the cutting room floor in some office somewhere. Who knows? This is my feeling. And I thought that character motivations were very unclear a lot of the time. I also felt that on the topic of Morbius's morality, I thought that the film went through some pretty, I guess we could call them script gymnastics, to always keep Michael on a safe side of things as far as the audience is concerned. And this, for me, comes back to the scene where it all went wrong, which was the scene on the ship, the cargo ship. I think it was a cargo ship, looked like one, when Michael takes his serum and becomes the vampire creature and kills the crew that he's hired to take him out into international waters where he can, work on something that is illegal without being interrupted. But I thought that was the scene where everything went off the rail, because the scene wasn't built up properly. We just cut to this ship, we see these rough-looking characters playing a game or something like this, and then we cut to the lab, and Morbius and Bancroft are working on giving him the injection. Then when he gets injected, I think he passes out, she straps him down. Then we go back to the guys playing their game, and the lights flicker, and one of them says, "Oh, I'm going to go check on the doctor and see what's going on." And I'm not sure if the lights flickering was supposed to be connected to what they were doing. I think it was. But the guy, when the crewman goes to see what's going on with the doctor, he brings an automatic weapon with him. And it was, up until that moment, I thought, okay, he's hired some smugglers or something. But I mean, why is the guy bringing in an automatic weapon to just go check on the doctors? Like, it was such a comic booky touch that these guys are just carrying their weapons everywhere. To my mind, it was just so that when Morbius goes through his transformation and goes into his rage mode and starts killing everybody, we have people that can fight back and are not just helpless victims. But there was no explanation in the scene for why these guys are walking around with guns in an environment that, as far as they know, is safe. It was just, I was cringing so much, because up until that point, the movie was quite a straight drama, and that was the point when the movie changed to being a different kind of film. Now we're going to go out of the drama and into this superhero horror movie kind of thing. And I felt that the transition was just, it was not only very sudden, but the movie suddenly became very childish because of these guys carrying weapons around when there was no in-story reason for it to happen. And also, I thought that the actual direction in that scene was just very poor compared to what we had already. We've got this very scary vampire guy suddenly, who used to be our main character, and he's just given to us. Like, immediately we're getting the cool slow-mo, and the effects were neat. I thought those were pretty good. They were interesting. I didn't really understand if they were supposed to be really occurring or if it was artistic license, all the streaking stuff. But in this scene in the cargo ship, the first time that he changes, we kind of got it all handed to us right away. There was no pacing of when do we see each, power, when do we get the first bullet time effect. It all just happens in the first scene. We basically hit a high octane situation immediately. Personally, I think that the way to fix this, to change the pacing, to slowly transition us from this drama into this horror superhero hybrid thing, change the whole way the scene is done on the cruise ship, on the cargo ship, by basically not doing it. So Bancroft would give him the injection. In his spine. She straps him down, keep it going up until that point. But then when Morbius passes out and he closes his eyes, the scene stops. And then, and we would go to his perspective, his eyelids closing. Then he opens his eyes, And it's when he's waking up on the floor. You know, there's blood on his mouth, maybe there's a last bit of transformation of his hands changing back to normal, and he's completely confused. And then we as the audience can share in his confusion. There's dead bodies all over the place. And then he goes and looks at the cameras, basically what happened in the movie, but without us having seen exactly what happened. So then we have just a few glimpses on the screens, and we have his terrified reaction, and maybe he throws up the way that he does in the movie. And then he gets off because of the ship and everything. And basically it could play out the same way, but it would just keep the suspense, and we wouldn't suddenly jump into this action scene, and we wouldn't have to, because we wouldn't see him kill anyone, we would be spared having to have these two-dimensional villains for him to slash up, and it would be more tragic because basically he just murdered a bunch of people, no matter how we want to write the scene, and I think it would be more effective if these guys were just victims. They weren't people that were going to put up a fight, and maybe they weren't good people, but they weren't walking around with weapons. Oh, I was cringing so much at that point. And that's where I would start, and then continuing into the movie, the next scene where the vampire stuff happens is, where someone gets killed, is the scene with the nurse. Now, it turns out Milo did that killing, but I think that scene would be more terrifying if we hadn't already seen one of the vampire creatures. You know, if that scene with the changing lights, if that was the first time that we were getting a look at this thing, and all we ultimately saw was a shadowy figure, and then an arm grabbing the lady by the throat, I think that would be much more intense, because we're still waiting to see Morbius. We've just seen the little flashes of his change when he's talking, or in that scene where he's alone trying to figure out what his powers are. Also, on a side note, how did those bats not die? I mean, they were floating in that, what did he call it, his fishbowl for the entire movie, and I think they were supposed to be a secret, because he talked about plausible deniability early on. It was just a mess. I don't know. I think to boil it down, it was unfortunately just a dumb action movie. And I say unfortunately because I went back and watched the trailer before sitting down to make this video. And it was as I thought. When I was watching the movie yesterday, there were a lot of things that I saw in that first trailer that just were not in the finished film. Little bits of dialogue, just scenes that didn't show up, that were either reshot. Like, obviously, all of the stuff with Michael Keaton as Toombs, all of that was reshot, clearly. And, that didn't even make sense. I don't need to explain why that doesn't make sense, I think. I'll do it anyway. Because, I mean, I think it's supposed to be that somehow he came into the world where Morbius is, the separate reality where Morbius is, from the MCU because of what Doctor Strange did. But what Doctor Strange did just sent everyone back to where they came from, and Toombs didn't come from the Morbius universe, so why would he? It's just a mess. And I suspect that it's going to take a while before all the reasons why this movie is such a mess finally come to light. But another problem with it, I think, as far as the action went, because I said I liked the effects and the action, but I felt there was something missing from the action. Blood. There were quite a few shots where someone would get scratched in the throat and they'd be standing there, you know, or something. But there would be no blood to speak of. My feeling is that another missing aspect of this movie, it wouldn't surprise me that this movie at some point in the production process was supposed to be R-rated, and that they decided a PG-13 rating was better at some point in the process. Perhaps because of how well the Spider-Man movie did, but I think that they either should have reshot the action scenes to fit in with a PG-13 aesthetic, as opposed to leaving shots where people have their throats cut and there's nothing to see. But I think it was, oh my goodness. But it really took me back to those earlier superhero movies where there isn't as much a sense of clear direction. It didn't feel like a superhero movie. It felt like someone who knows how to make an action movie but doesn't know how to handle something with a vast mythology, so they're heavily dummying it down. It also felt like a project made by people who think that a superhero movie is much easier to make than it really is. and that people will go to see anything just because it's got a comic book character in it. It would not surprise me that someone's creative vision at some point in this process was just completely killed. That's the feeling I had. Because just looking at the trailer, again, going back to shots that didn't make it into the movie, I'll throw up a few here if I remember. I feel like there was a third act that was missing. I feel like there were bits of exposition, bits of development that were just not in this movie, and the result was an over-edited, poorly paced thing. And as much as people complain about a director like Zack Snyder who uses a lot of slow-mo and perhaps pads his runtime, I think Morbius is the case of the opposite, where too much has been removed. And the final product is far too streamlined. And it's just, you can't get involved in characters if you're constantly noticing how things don't fit together. But it reminded me of, I did not like Venom, I did not care for either of the Amazing Spider-Man films with Andrew Garfield. I didn't care for the sequel to Venom, and I felt that this movie Morbius had a lot of the same issues that those movies do, which is not really a sense of how to carry the story from one act to the other. Based on the ratings, I wasn't expecting something fantastic, but I try not to let ratings dissuade me from going to something, and I'm afraid it's... maybe that 17% is too low. That's pretty bad. I think there are worse superhero movies out there, but considering how long Morbius has been around, there's a lot to work with here, and considering that vampires have been around even longer, and what tremendous actors they got to be in this film, that was probably what got me to go more than anything, was the actors. I mean, Jared Leto, Matt Smith, and Jared Harris, that's a triple threat right there, and it's always annoying when they've got such good actors in something that's just not good. And Michael Keaton coming back as the Vulture, that's really exciting as well. It should have been, but instead it was just, I'd much prefer this original scene, whatever this was supposed to be. This looks a lot better and a lot more easily explained than whatever this was supposed to be in the final movie that we got. So that being said, I think it's been making quite a bit of money, and if they make a sequel, maybe they could kind of take some of this into account. I mean, I don't mean that they'll watch this video, because that's not going to happen, but I mean if they just take into account the poor critical reception of the movie, then maybe they can pull something together here for the sequel. And it would be horrible if Jared Leto has been once again well cast and just wasted on an amazing character. On the other hand, my takeaway from this is I would actually be down for a Stroud and Rodriguez limited series. I thought that their dynamic was amazing, and that was my biggest takeaway. Yeah, that's not good. Anyway, and let me know down in the comments what you thought about it. Maybe I'm wrong here, because as always, this is just my opinion. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.